Hi everybody. On this episode of Dungeons and Die Rolls, I'm going to be giving my review of Time of Legend's Joan of Arc. I received my copy of Joan of Arc about a week and a half ago, which you can see in my unboxing video that I did previously. Since then, I've had the opportunity to play it a handful of times, and I remember the things that I liked when I played the demo at Gen Con last year that made me want to buy the game. So that's good. I'm going to go through, show the components, describe the unique bits of rules, talk about the things that I like and dislike about the game. My reviews are not teaching videos. I'm not going to describe the rules exhaustively. I'm going to touch upon the basics, and I'm going to talk about the unique parts that I think make the game stand out. But this is not a how-to-play video. So starting with the components, everything is very nice. In the unboxing video, I showed off some of the miniatures. I'll do it again. We have little guys and mounted guys and some larger monsters to eat the guys, and everything is in scale, which is always something that appeals to me in this kind of game. The printed components are nice. You're going to see some of the cards and the cardboard tiles in a minute when I go through some of the rules, but they're all very nice. The artwork is good and suits the game. The quality of the print of the rule books are good. I'll get a little bit into the interior of the rule books in a minute, but everything is pretty well made. What you didn't see in my unboxing video was the amount of cardboard that comes with this. These are the punch board sheets that came in the core set box, and this is like a solid 1.5 inches of the box was taken up by these. And these are the tokens and the player boards and things like that. They are a touch on the thin side for me in terms of the cardboard. Nothing is thin enough to really be flimsy, but you can see that the boards have sag to them when you're sitting up like that. The tokens are all well perforated. Everything came out very cleanly. Nothing was in any danger of tearing. It all came out really nicely. Now, speaking of punching out my tokens, my first big beef with Joan of Arc is unfortunately a big beef that I tend to have, especially with Kickstarter games, with games more than I should, but especially with Kickstarter ones, and that's this. So this does have a leg up compared to some games I've gotten in that it does actually have a contents page in the manual. However, it is woefully incomplete. This list is missing so much of what came on those punch boards that it is practically useless. There are way different quantities of some of the tokens than in what are listed here. There are tokens and pieces on the punch board that don't exist at all on this page. It makes it really not useful for trying to figure out what you have, especially when two of the punch boards are the same. And now one of these I punched out all the way, and I saw the other one was the same, so I didn't finish, and I will. But between these two boards, there are some things that are correct. Like you can see, there are 2 of the player mats on here, and you need 4 of those in total. But then there are 8 of these rally tokens, and you're supposed to have 8. So if you punch out both of these, you have 16, which prompts me and presumably other logical people to start going at this and saying, wait a minute, if this is going to give me way more of these than I should have, do I have the right sheet? You know, did they give me a second copy of this instead of another sheet that I was supposed to have? And I've ascertained through looking at other unboxing videos and such that I am pretty sure it's correct, but it's just weird that they wouldn't say something about that. I can understand it being cheaper to print off 2 copies of the same artwork sheet than to create a second sheet of artwork and shape the die cuts for that and all that kind of stuff. I understand it was a cost-effective measure, but then say something, you know, like address it in the rule book, stick a piece of paper in the box. Don't make me start asking around as to whether I have the right things or not. Unfortunately, this also applies to the miniatures in a couple of ways. For one thing, again, this list here, it just doesn't line up that well with what's in the box. Better than the tokens does, but especially when you start getting into the reliquary box, which is basically the stretch goals, a lot of that is just not cataloged. And it makes it very hard to organize your materials and to start preparing for scenarios. And that's one of the weakest parts, is getting into the scenario preparation. The scenario booklet does say up front, or maybe it says in the rulebook, but it says up front clearly that all of the scenarios in the book contain material from both the core set, or the base game, or whatever they call it, and the reliquary box. It gives you no indication as to which is which. So you're setting up for the very first introductory scenario, and one of the civilians is found in the reliquary box. How is one to know that? Well, you can say, okay, I'm getting my stuff out and it's not here, so I guess I have to open up this second thing and start going through it. How does this affect the retail edition? People who just buy the game in stores, which I assume is going to be the same as the base game that backers have received, and not have the contents of the reliquary box, which are the stretch goals. What are they going to do? There's an entire figure in there, not to mention its card. The card is in the reliquary box. For the introductory scenario, the card is in the reliquary box. I saw posts from people from Mythic Games saying, well, you can just read it out of the book. I'm like, no, you can't. The text, the image for the card is like 2 inches tall in the book. It's nominally there, but unless you're going to have a magnifying glass the size of your head trying to read that card text out of the book every time one of the players cares about what the card text says, no. And especially on the learning scenario, that was a very poor series of decisions to make. However, there's a lot else that I really like about the scenarios. I like that they are crafted to have both historical and fantasy scenarios. So I think that's very cool. They have historically relevant or accurate scenarios. So you can have the British are sieging this village and trying to starve them out, and the French are trying to break the siege before the peasants starve. That's very cool. And then you can turn around and have a scenario where you're going to a town because there have been rumors of a werewolf and you're trying to find and kill off the werewolf, or slay the Tarisk, or fight Dracula or a dragon. All that stuff is awesome. So I really like that they cater to both fans of historical things and fantastical things. That's really neat. I also like that they have scenarios that are actually crafted for a different number of players. Most games in this vein are 2-player games, and then like, well, you can play with more people by taking those 2 sides and splitting up the units so that each side has 2 players controlling some of the units, and you're teamed up together and it's 2-on-2, which is really just a way to bootleg a 2-player game. This, you have scenarios that are actually made with 3 or 4 different factions and armies included in the scenario. So they're built to accommodate different number of players, which I love. So you can have, for example, the Tarisk scenario, which is this bad boy. You have the government is like, screw this, the terrorists came back, we're going to just kill the monster. You have the church, who wants to summon one of their saints and use a magical artifact to tame the terrorist. And then you have the terrorist and its cultists who want to kidnap civilians to indoctrinate them into the cult that worships the terrorist. So very asymmetric goals, and they each have their own specific army lists that you're using and set up and that kind of thing. So it's very cool. So here are some of the pieces on the board. This is not a full game setup. It's just showing off some of the components so that I can touch on how some of the rules interact. The basis of the system that I found to be unique about this game is over here, and this is each player's play mat, and on it they're going to be placing these different colored cubes which represent different kinds of orders that they can give to their units. On a player's turn, they have to play at least one of their available orders, but they may play all of them if they wish. You take a cube and you place it on an area, and it activates all of the units within that area, and you choose what kind of action each unit does. They can move, attack, activate character special skills, interact with civilians, things like that. But everything in that area activates. As a general rule, each area can only be activated one time on a given player's turn. Now, as I said, the different colors of cubes indicate different kinds of orders. The gray cube is your generic order. It activates everyone in that area. The green cube is a charge. It allows units who have the charge skill to both move and then attack in one activation and without needing a cube on the area that they move into. This can allow for strategies like moving him to charge here and then attack into that area, and then later I could activate that area and have him attack again. The brown cube is an exception to the rule that allows only one cube per area, so you can use a brown cube to reactivate a previous area. So if I charged into here and attacked that guy, he survived somehow, so I activate this area again, attack him. Somehow there are still people alive in there. I can use a brown order to reactivate that area, attack into it again. The blue cubes are interrupt orders. As you are going through your turn and you're playing the orders off of your mat onto the board, another player can use a blue order in between the resolution of your orders to resolve something for his troops on the battlefield. Because the orders activate all of the units in an area, and one of the things that a unit can do when activated is move, a fair part of the strategy in the game is figuring out how to get all of the troops that you want to be at a specific place there as efficiently as possible. So for example, I might activate that area to move my knight there. I could activate this guy to send him here. I can then use just one cube to move both of these guys over here, and if they both had the charge skill, I could use just one cube to move them both over here and then attack the Tarisk, which my cavalry hates the idea of. He's fainted away just looking at it. But that's the idea of how orders work. Now looking at this, you can see that these hexes are designed in several ways. There are hexes that contain a single area, hexes that contain 2 areas, and then hexes that contain 3. This is a perfectly normal part of a war game like this, but this is one of the ways that there's going to be some finicky stuff to try to keep track of as soon as you start learning the game. Each kind of hex has a different number of units that can be in an area. depending on whether it's a full hex, 2 areas in a hex, or 3 areas in a hex. Those all have different unit capacities. And some units take up more capacity than others. Additionally, all the bits of artwork that you see here represent different terrain types, and they each have some kind of game-changing ability. So all of these are different kinds of terrain, and that's another thing for you to try to keep track of when you're learning the game. And I highly recommend that you try to keep track of it when you start learning the game, because speaking for myself, I didn't pay very much attention to it during my first learning game, and then I have a hard time adding it in later on. It's just something that I forget to check for. Speaking of unit capacity, one of my gripes with the components in this game is this right here. This little dude, he's a Vulgier, I think, represents a single unit. The way the game is packaged and what the instructions tell you to do is to take these larger bases that the game comes with and stick 3 of these guys in here thusly. Now this has no actual gameplay effect. This is just supposed to look cool, like you're moving around throngs of soldiers and you have a little army under your command instead of just piddly dudes. However, this takes a lot of extra time during setup. It takes extra time during cleanup. It means you have to be more careful moving this around because these guys just come right out of there. And when you start getting into the unit capacity of areas, how am I supposed to fit 6 bases like that inside of that little 1/3 of the hex? Come on. Maybe the unit capacity for a 1/3 is only 4. But still, even 4 of those you can see are not going to cleanly fit inside of there without sticking out across the borders. I don't see any reason to play like this, and it's just... it ends up, for me, and anyone who shares my viewpoint on it, it ends up being a waste of space and components and plastic and money, because I am never going to assemble those 3 guys onto a base unless I were gluing it together permanently, which then would make the storage of this thing a nightmare. And I don't even know if there are enough of those large bases to simultaneously fit all of the units that could be assembled like that. So I just find that to be kind of thoughtless. I understand the intent. I don't think it's practical. So regardless of that, I'm going to just talk briefly about the board that you see on the top here, because that has some neat things going on. Every round, one of these gets flipped over. And what this does is it gives every player the same number of gray cubes. So those are your basic orders. You then reveal 3 of these, and each player gets to choose 1 to resolve. They can choose the same one, but each player gets to choose 1 of the 3. They do things like giving you experience points that you can use to play more powerful versions of your heroes, to legend points that you can spend on tactics cards from your hand, or a lot of them are like this, where this says you can trade one of your gray orders to get a green cavalry order. And that is the primary source of getting the different colors of cubes, so you have access to those kinds of orders. Whatever you don't spend during a round drops to the bottom into storage. So you can try to plan ahead and gather yourself for a powerful round later on. But each area has a maximum storage of 3. So anything that you try to save beyond that you don't use in a round will get lost. Each unit in the game is represented by a card that you keep in front of you for its stats, and it lists their offense, defense, any traits, special skills, powers, how much damage they can take in the case of your hero characters. Regular troops all die with a single wound, but your characters can take more than that. And combat resolution itself is very typical for a game of this sort, which is not a bad thing. It just isn't really a different thing. You have different colored dice that have custom symbols on there representing offensive and defensive icons. And you just assemble your attack pool based by the colors on the card. Your opponent assembles his defending pool based on the colors on his card. And you roll the dice. And the opponent, the attacker, tracks whatever offensive symbols you got. The defender is going to use shield icons to negate your symbols. And then you resolve the attack. One thing that kind of annoys me about combat resolution is the number of dice that come with the game. And this is, again, a very common thing for war games of this sort, but just because it's common doesn't mean that it's acceptable. There are only 5 dice of each color that come with the game. The introductory scenario has each player controlling troops that can require you to roll, for example, 8 yellow in one attack, or 8 red for defense, I believe, from the cavalry. Or maybe that was their attack and they need, I think that might be their attack. But anyway, that's not the point. The point is that, like, the very first thing that a player is going to do with this game out of the box is play a scenario where if they're doing any kind of tactical goodness, they're not going to have enough dice to resolve an attack at once. You're going to have to roll 5 things, track the results in your head or other die colors in front of you, and then re-roll 3 of them. Come on. How much can these dice cost? Make the $100 whatever game $5 more and have double the dice. Or have 8 yellow dice and fewer black, or, enough so that the 2 players who just got this new thing can sit down, play the introductory game, and not be scrounging around for stuff and feeling frustrated that they don't have a complete experience. Maybe I'm going ranty over nothing, but I've played enough of these tabletop board game, war game things that have custom dice and so have this same kind of problem that it gets on my nerves at this point. Like, they've been making games in this vein for a sufficient number of years that at some point someone should just say, hey, this is a thing, let's do it differently, let's do it better. Especially since this was a Kickstarter. As far as I know, there's no retail stuff available for it yet, which means that I couldn't buy an extra die pack if I wanted to. So I'm stuck with re-rolling or making up my own dice or something. But, yeah. So, niggling issues aside, the number of dice in there, the clarity of scenarios when it comes to where the pieces are coming from, whether a given, say, unit actually has its own model or needs to be given some kind of generic thing. These are things that can frustrate a player who's just diving into it, and heck, it frustrates me a little bit that I have to go on Board Game Geek and find lists of which scenario has which cards in which box until I organize them all together, or which mini is supposed to be this thing if I care that hard. At this point, I don't. If I can find someone that's recognizable, the person controlling the character knows that's who it's supposed to be, cool. That's good enough. But little issues like that you can deal with. The important takeaway for me is that I played a demo of this game and I liked it well enough that I immediately went home from Gen Con and pre-ordered it. I've played it with several friends over the past week, and they have all enjoyed it and wanted to play it multiple times. So that is the real takeaway. The things in regards to organization, and such like that are regrettable, but they're not a deal breaker. I'm sad to say they're a little par for the course when it comes to Kickstarter material, which shouldn't be, but kind of is. Doesn't make it forgivable per se, but it's not worse than any other game like this that I've gotten. The game itself is far superior to many other Kickstarter things that I've gotten. So, Time of Legends Joan of Arc is a good play. It's fun, especially if you have some of the big monster minis on there, and you have two armies clashing against a Terrask or a Manticore or that huge dragon. It's very cool and dramatic, and all of the minis and artwork are very thematic. So I quite enjoy the game. I'm going to continue playing it, and I may look into painting some of the larger monsters just because they are going to look darn cool. So hopefully my rambling thoughts were helpful to you if you're looking into this as a game that you want to try playing or consider buying. And if that's the case, then subscribe to my channel, and I'll be doing some more videos about games for this Gen Con.